In the small town of Ridgewood Heights, life revolved around school drama, friendships, and trying to fit in. It was one of those places where everyone knew each other, or at least thought they did. At Ridgewood High, cliques ruled the hallways. The jocks, the nerds, the popular kids, and the rest just trying to survive unnoticed. Among these students was a quiet girl who had recently transferred from an inner-city school. She wasn't loud or flashy. She didn't try to grab attention. Her name was Amara Johnson, and she preferred books over gossip. Amara wasn't your average teenager. She carried herself with a calmness that made people curious but also kept them at arm's length. What most people didn't know about her was that beneath her quiet exterior lay years of training that went far beyond what anyone would expect from a high school student. Back home, her dad, a retired military man, had taught her how to defend herself. He believed in discipline and strength, not just physical but mental too. So every weekend, instead of hanging out at malls or playing video games, Amara spent hours learning boxing moves, self-defense techniques, and even some grappling skills in their makeshift basement gym. But none of this mattered much when she first walked into Ridgewood High. To her classmates, she was just another new face, a shy girl who sat alone during lunch and always seemed buried in a book. And while some might have seen her as easy prey for teasing, no one dared approach her until Derek showed up. Derek Thompson, known as Tank to his friends and enemies, was the typical high school bully. Standing tall with broad shoulders and muscles that came from years of football practice, he thrived on making others feel small. Whether it was tripping someone in the hallway, calling them names, or stealing their lunch money, Derek lived for the power rush he got from intimidating others. Most students avoided him like the plague because standing up to Derek usually ended badly. For weeks, Amara managed to stay under Derek's radar. She kept her head down, avoided eye contact, and did everything she could to blend into the background. But Derek wasn't someone who let things slide easily. One afternoon after gym class, he spotted her by the lockers quietly tying her shoelaces. Something about her demeanor irritated him. Maybe it was the way she ignored the whispers around her, or how she never seemed afraid despite being new. Whatever it was, Derek decided she needed to be put in her place. He sauntered over, flanked by two of his buddies, and slammed his hand against the locker next to hers. "Hey, you!" he barked, his voice echoing through the nearly empty corridor. Startled students nearby froze, unsure whether to intervene or run away. Amara slowly turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You think you're better than us?" Derek sneered, leaning closer. When she didn't respond, he shoved her lightly against the row of lockers. The metallic clang echoed loudly, drawing more eyes toward the scene. Whispers filled the air as students debated whether to step in or pull out their phones to record the moment. Amara didn't say a word. She simply stared back at Derek, her dark eyes locking onto his. There was no fear in her gaze, only a quiet intensity that sent a shiver down his spine, though he wouldn't admit it. For a brief second, Derek hesitated. This wasn't the reaction he was used to. Most kids either cried, begged for mercy, or lashed out angrily. But Amara? She stood there like a statue, unmoving and unbothered. "Answer me," Derek snapped, growing frustrated. Still, Amara remained silent. Finally, she pushed herself off the locker and adjusted her backpack. Without saying a single word, she walked past him and disappeared into the crowd. Derek stood there fuming, feeling oddly unsettled. He didn't realize it then, but he had, just picked on the wrong person. That night, as Amara lay in bed replaying the incident in her mind, she felt conflicted. Part of her wanted to brush it off, to keep ignoring Derek and hope he'd eventually lose interest. But another part of her, a fiery side she rarely showed, simmered with anger. She thought about all the times she'd seen bullies like Derek target others, the weaker kids, the loners, the ones who couldn't fight back. She hated seeing innocent people get hurt, and now she found herself caught in the same web. Her dad's words echoed in her mind. Fighting isn't about proving you're stronger, it's about protecting yourself and others. Amara understood that lesson well. She had trained hard not to dominate others, but to ensure she could hold her own if ever threatened. Yet she also knew violence wasn't the answer unless absolutely necessary. As she drifted off to sleep, she resolved to handle the situation carefully but firmly. Little did she know Derek wasn't done with her yet. The tension between them grew thicker with each passing day. In the cafeteria, Derek made snide comments loud enough for her to hear. In the hallways, he bumped into her accidentally whenever they crossed paths. Each time, Amara chose not to react. She focused on her studies, her friends, and keeping her cool. But deep inside, she was preparing. For what? She wasn't sure. All she knew was that she wouldn't let Derek push her around forever, and so, the stage was set for a showdown neither of them could have predicted. While Derek continued flexing his muscles and throwing his weight around, Amara quietly sharpened her resolve. Somewhere in the balance of patience and action, a storm was brewing, one that would change both their lives forever. That evening, Amara sat cross-legged on the living room floor with her dad. They were watching old boxing matches on TV, something they often did together. The screen flickered with images of legendary fighters throwing punches, dodging blows, and dancing around the ring like artists creating masterpieces with their fists. Her dad paused the video and turned to look at her. "You remember what I always say about fighting?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Amara nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, you've told me 1,000 times. Fighting isn't about showing off or proving you're stronger. It's about knowing when to protect yourself." Her dad smiled, leaning back against the couch. "Exactly. And there's another part to it. You don't throw the first punch unless you absolutely have to. Fighting should be your last option, not your first." Amara listened intently, even though she'd heard these lessons before. Growing up, her dad had drilled them into her mind as much as he'd drilled footwork and jabs into her muscles. He wasn't just teaching her how to fight. He was teaching her how to think, how to stay calm under pressure, and how to choose her battles wisely. But tonight those words felt heavier than usual. Earlier that day, Derek had cornered her by the lockers again. His threats echoed in her head. "You think you're too good for us?" She could still feel the cold metal of the locker pressing against her back, the heat of his breath as he leaned in closer. Amara hadn't said a word during the confrontation, but now, sitting safely at home, she replayed the moment over and over in her mind. What if she had fought back? Would it have made things better? Or worse? Her dad seemed to sense her unease. "What's bothering you, kiddo?" he asked gently. Amara hesitated for a moment, then decided to tell him everything. She explained how Derek kept targeting her, how he shoved her around and tried to embarrass her in front of everyone. As she spoke, her frustration bubbled to the surface. "I don't want to let him win," she admitted. "But I also don't want to stoop to his level, you know?" Her dad nodded thoughtfully. "It's tough being put in a position like that. You've got two choices here. You can either ignore him and hope he gets bored, or you can stand your ground and show him you're not someone to mess with." "But what if standing my ground means fighting him?" Amara asked, her voice tinged with worry. "I mean, I know I can take care of myself, but isn't that exactly what he wants? To provoke me into doing something stupid?" Her dad chuckled softly. "Good point. Bullies like Derek thrive on reactions. They feed off fear, anger, anything that makes them feel powerful. But here's the thing. You don't have to react the way he expects you to. If you decide to confront him, do it on your terms, not his. Stay calm, stay focused, and most importantly, don't lose control." Amara mulled this over, letting her dad's advice sink in. She knew he was right. It wasn't about giving Derek what he wanted. It was about finding the courage to face him head-on while staying true to herself. Still, the idea of actually going toe-to-toe with someone like Derek terrified her. He was bigger, louder, and more aggressive than anyone she'd ever dealt with before. Was she really ready for that kind of challenge? Later that night, after saying goodnight to her dad, Amara lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come easily, not with Derek's mocking laughter replaying in her ears. She thought about all the times she'd seen bullies, like him, push people around thinking they could get away with it because no one dared to stop them. She remembered the faces of the kids who cowered in fear, too scared to speak up or fight back. And then she thought about herself. Who was she really? Was she the quiet girl who blended into the background hoping no one would notice her? Or was she someone stronger, someone capable of standing up not just for herself, but for others too? A memory surfaced from years ago, back when she was younger. One day, a group of older boys had been picking on a smaller kid in her neighborhood. Amara had stepped in without thinking twice, shouting at the boys until they backed off. Back then, she hadn't known any fancy boxing moves or self-defense techniques. All she'd had was raw determination, and somehow that had been enough. Now as she lay in bed wrestling with her thoughts, she realized something important. She might not be able to change Derek overnight, but she could change how she responded to him. She didn't need to become like him, loud, mean, or violent to prove a point. Instead, she could use what her dad had taught her: patience, discipline, and the ability to think clearly even in the heat of the moment. The next morning, Amara woke up feeling different. Not fearless exactly, but more resolved. She dressed quickly, grabbed her backpack, and headed to school with a plan forming in her mind. She wasn't sure yet whether she'd end up confronting Derek directly, but she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't let him intimidate her anymore. As she walked through the crowded hallways of Ridgewood High, she noticed the usual stares and whispers following her. Some students glanced at her curiously, wondering if she'd crumble under Derek's bullying. Others avoided eye contact altogether, afraid of getting caught in the crossfire. Amara ignored them all, focusing instead on keeping her composure. She reminded herself of her dad's advice: stay calm, stay focused. During lunch, Amara found herself sitting alone at a corner table, nibbling on a sandwich. She wasn't hungry, though. The knot in her stomach made it hard to eat. Across the cafeteria, Derek sat surrounded by his crew, laughing loudly and making crude jokes. Every so often he'd glance in her direction, as if daring her to meet his gaze. For a while, Amara pretended not to notice. She kept her eyes down, pretending to read a book, but inside she was bracing herself for whatever might happen next. She knew Derek wouldn't leave her alone forever. Guys like him thrived on drama, on creating scenes that left everyone talking. It was only a matter of time before he came looking for her again. Sure enough, halfway through lunch, Derek stood up and swaggered toward her table. His friends cheered him on, egging him to show her who's boss. Students nearby stopped eating, their forks suspended mid-air as they watched the spectacle unfold. Amara closed her book slowly and looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Derek grinned smugly, clearly enjoying the attention. "Hey, new girl," he sneered, planting himself squarely in front of her. "How come you never talk? Too scared to open your mouth?" Amara didn't respond. She simply stared at him, her dark eyes steady and unflinching. For a moment, Derek faltered. He wasn't used to being met with silence. It threw him off balance. But he quickly recovered, leaning in closer to taunt her further. "Cat got your tongue?" he jeered. When she still didn't reply, he reached out and snatched her lunch tray, spilling its contents onto her lap. Laughter erupted around them as students pointed and whispered. Amara sat perfectly still, letting the greasy food drip onto her jeans. Her heart pounded in her chest, but outwardly she remained calm. Derek smirked, expecting her to cry or beg for mercy. Instead, Amara placed her hands flat on the table and pushed herself to her feet. Slowly, deliberately, she grabbed her empty tray and turned to face him. The entire cafeteria went silent, waiting to see what she'd do next. "You've got 5 seconds to walk away," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Or I'll make you regret this." Derek blinked, taken aback. Then he laughed, shaking his head. "What are you gonna do, huh? Write me a bad review?" Amara didn't answer. She just stood there, holding the tray like a shield, her posture relaxed but ready. Deep down, she hoped Derek would back down, sparing both of them the trouble of escalating things further. But deep down, she also knew what she was capable of, and she was prepared to act if necessary. The cafeteria buzzed with anticipation, every pair of eyes glued to the standoff between the bully and the girl who refused to be intimidated. Whatever happened next, Amara realized, would define not just her reputation but her character. And she was determined to come out on top, not by tearing Derek down but by rising above his cruelty. The cafeteria was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Every student held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Derek stood there, his smirk fading slightly as Amara stared him down. Her calmness unnerved him. It wasn't the reaction he was used to. Most kids either cowered or lashed out in anger when he pushed them around. But Amara? She looked like she was ready for anything. Derek laughed again, trying to mask his unease. "Oh, come on," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "You're not gonna do anything, you're just talk." Amara didn't blink. She tightened her grip on the tray and repeated herself, slower this time, letting each word sink in. 5 seconds, walk away." Her voice was steady, almost casual, but there was something sharp about it, like a warning. Derek hesitated for a split second, glancing at his friends for reassurance. They were grinning, egging him on, clearly, expecting him to put her in her place. After all, Derek had never backed down from a fight before. Why start now? "Fine," he said, finally rolling his eyes. "If you want to play tough, let's go." And with that, he swung his fist toward her face. But Amara was faster. She ducked under his punch with ease, moving like water slipping through fingers. Before Derek could process what had happened, she stepped forward and delivered a quick jab to his ribs. The impact made him stumble backward, clutching his side. He gasped, stunned by the sudden pain, and by the fact that she'd actually hit him. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some students cheered, others screamed, and a few scrambled to record the scene on their phones. Teachers weren't far behind, rushing into the cafeteria to break things up. But none of that mattered to Amara. She was focused solely on Derek, who was now glaring at her, humiliation burning in his eyes. "You think that's funny?" he growled, lunging at her again. This time he aimed low, trying to tackle her to the ground, but Amara sidestepped effortlessly, using his momentum against him. With a swift motion, she hooked her leg behind his knee and sent him sprawling onto the floor. The room went silent again. Derek landed hard, the wind knocked out of him. For a moment he just lay there staring up at the ceiling, completely bewildered. How had this tiny girl taken him down so easily? He was supposed to be the strongest guy in school, the one everyone feared. Yet here he was, flat on his back, looking utterly ridiculous. Amara didn't waste any time. She moved quickly, pinning him down with her knee pressed lightly against his chest. It wasn't meant to hurt. It was just enough to keep him still. Derek struggled briefly, but she held firm, her balance perfect, her movements precise. When he finally stopped thrashing, she leaned in close, her voice low but clear. "Had enough?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Derek opened his mouth to retort, but no words came out. Instead, he muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like an apology. Amara eased off him and stood up, brushing imaginary dust from her hands. The entire cafeteria erupted into applause, cheers, and whistles. Students who had once been afraid of Derek now clapped for Amara, some even chanting her name. Teachers rushed over to separate them, shouting for everyone to settle down. One teacher grabbed Derek by the arm and hauled him to his feet, while another approached Amara cautiously. "Young lady, we need to talk about this," the teacher said sternly, though there was a hint of admiration in her tone. Amara nodded without argument. She knew fighting wasn't allowed, and she was prepared to face the consequences. Still, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, not because she'd hurt Derek, but because she'd stood up for herself. More importantly, she'd shown everyone that bullying wasn't something they had to tolerate. Later that afternoon, Amara sat in the principal's office, replaying the events in her mind. She felt a mix of emotions, pride, relief, and a little guilt. Pride because she'd handled the situation calmly and decisively. Relief because Derek wouldn't bother her, or anyone else, anytime soon. And guilt because despite everything, she hadn't wanted to humiliate him. Fighting wasn't her style, but sometimes it was necessary. The principal, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on her nose, studied Amara carefully. "I have to admit," she began, "that was quite impressive. I've never seen anyone take Derek down like that, but I also can't ignore the fact that violence isn't acceptable in our school." "I understand," Amara replied honestly. "I didn't want to fight him. I tried to avoid it, but he wouldn't stop. I only fought back because I had to protect myself." The principal nodded thoughtfully. "I believe you. And judging by the footage we reviewed from students' phones, it seems like you acted in self-defense. Still, we'll need to address this formally. You'll serve detention for a week, but nothing more severe than that." Amara accepted the punishment without complaint. Compared to what could have happened, it was a light sentence. Besides, she figured a week of detention was a small price to pay for putting Derek in his place. Word of the showdown spread like wildfire through the school. By the end of the day, nearly everyone knew what had happened. Some students congratulated Amara in the hallways, thanking her for standing up to Derek. Others kept their distance, unsure whether to admire her or fear her. Either way, she became a legend overnight, a symbol of strength and resilience. Even Derek seemed different after the incident. He avoided Amara like the plague, refusing to look her in the eye whenever they passed in the halls. His friends teased him relentlessly, calling him Tank less often and whispering jokes about how he got beaten by a girl half his size. For once, Derek didn't retaliate. He slouched in his seat during class, his usual bravado replaced by shame. Despite the attention, Amara stayed humble. She didn't gloat or boast about what she'd done. Instead, she focused on her studies and tried to move past the drama. Still, she noticed subtle changes in the way people treated her. Kids, who had ignored her before suddenly wanted to sit with her at lunch. Teachers praised her for her composure and maturity. Even the principal mentioned her during an assembly, encouraging students to stand up against bullying in healthy, constructive ways. One afternoon, as Amara walked home from school, she found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. She realized that standing up to Derek hadn't just changed her life, it had changed the lives of others too. Seeing her take action gave other students the courage to speak up when they saw injustice. Conversations about bullying became more open, and teachers started paying closer attention to interactions among students. Still, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't fully resolved things with Derek. Yes, she'd defended herself, and yes, he'd backed off, for now. But deep down she knew that real change didn't come from humiliating someone. It came from understanding and forgiveness. A few days later, she decided to confront him, not with fists, but with words. After gym class, she spotted Derek sitting alone on a bench outside the locker rooms. His head was bowed and he looked smaller somehow, like the weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. Amara hesitated for a moment, then approached cautiously. "Hey," she said softly, stopping a few feet away. Derek glanced up, startled, then scowled when he saw who it was. "What do you want?" he snapped, his voice lacking its usual edge. Amara took a deep breath. "Look, I'm not here to rub it in your face. I wanted to say that I don't hate you. I never did. I just want you to stop making other people feel small, okay? That's all." Derek stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly he nodded. "Yeah," he muttered, looking away. "Okay." It wasn't much, but it was a start. As Amara walked away, she felt a sense of closure wash over her. She knew Derek still had a lot of growing to do, and she doubted he'd change overnight. But at least he'd acknowledged his behavior, and that was progress. Sometimes, winning a battle wasn't about throwing the hardest punch. It was about planting a seed of change, however, small, and hoping it would grow into something better. And for Amara, that was enough. The days following the cafeteria showdown were unlike anything Amara had ever experienced. She walked through the hallways of Ridgewood High feeling like a completely different person, not because she sought attention, but because it was thrust upon her whether she liked it or not. Students who once barely noticed her now greeted her with wide smiles and nods of respect. Some even approached her to thank her for standing up to Derek. One girl, a shy freshman with glasses too big for her face, stopped Amara near her locker, after class. "I just wanted to say, thank you," the girl said softly, clutching her books tightly to her chest. "You don't know how much it means to see someone stand up to him. He used to pick on me all the time." Amara smiled gently, touched by the girl's words. "You're welcome," she replied. "But remember, you don't have to let anyone treat you badly. If something happens, tell someone. Your parents, a teacher, anyone. You deserve to feel safe." The girl nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude, before hurrying off down the hallway. Moments like this made Amara realize that what she'd done wasn't just about herself. It had given others permission to find their own voice. Still, the newfound spotlight didn't sit entirely comfortably with her. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and part of her wished life could go back to the way it was before. Meanwhile, Derek seemed to be doing everything in his power to avoid her. Gone was the swagger and bravado he once carried, so effortlessly. Now he kept his head low, avoiding eye contact with both Amara and the rest of the student body. His usual entourage of friends had dwindled, leaving him isolated during lunch and breaks. Whispers followed him wherever he went, and while some students mocked him mercilessly, others felt a strange sense of pity. Even bullies, it turned out, weren't immune to consequences. Despite the distance between them, Amara couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at her conscience. Beating Derek may have been necessary in the moment, but she hadn't intended to humiliate him or break him. Her dad's lessons echoed in her mind. Fighting isn't about proving you're stronger. It's about protecting yourself and others. Had she crossed a line? Was there a better way she could have handled things? Her thoughts weighed heavily on her as she sat alone on the bleachers after school one afternoon. The football field stretched out before her, empty except for a few stragglers practicing late. She watched them absent-mindedly, replaying the fight in her mind. What if she had walked away instead of confronting Derek? Would he still be terrorizing the halls? Or would someone else have eventually stepped in? Her musings were interrupted when a shadow fell across her lap. Looking up, she saw Mrs. Carter, the school counselor, standing there with a kind smile. "Mind if I join you?" the older woman asked. Amara shrugged. "Sure." Mrs. Carter settled onto the bleacher beside her, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "How are you holding up?" she asked after a pause. "Things must be interesting for you right now." Amara sighed, picking at a loose thread on her jeans. "I guess. I mean, people seem to think I'm some kind of hero or something, but I didn't do it for that. I just wanted him to leave me alone." "I understand," Mrs. Carter said thoughtfully. "But sometimes actions speak louder than words. By standing up to Derek, you sent a message not just to him but to everyone else here. Bullying thrives when no one challenges it. You showed them that it doesn't have to be that way." Amara frowned, her brow furrowing. "Yeah, but at what cost?" Derek looked so defeated afterward. "I didn't want to crush him, you know. I just wanted to make him stop." Mrs. Carter nodded slowly. "That's a valid concern. It's natural to feel conflicted. Standing up for yourself is important, but so is empathy. Maybe there's still an opportunity to help Derek learn from this experience. Sometimes even bullies need guidance. They're often acting out because they're hurting inside." Amara considered this for a moment. She'd never thought about Derek in those terms before. To her, he'd always been the villain, the guy who pushed people around without a second thought. But maybe there was more to him than met the eye. Maybe his behavior stemmed from something deeper, something unresolved. Determined to explore the idea further, Amara decided to reach out to Derek, not to lecture him, but to offer understanding. After gym class the next day, she spotted him, sitting alone on a bench outside the locker room, staring blankly at the ground. Taking a deep breath, she approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. "Hey," she said softly, keeping her tone neutral. Derek glanced up, startled, then scowled when he realized who it was. "What do you want?" he snapped. though his voice lacked its usual venom. Amara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Look, I'm not here to rub it in your face. I wanted to say that I don't hate you. I never did. I just want you to stop making other people feel small, okay? That's all. Derek stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly, he nodded. Yeah, he muttered, looking away. Okay. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, subtle changes began to ripple through Ridgewood High. With Derek lying low, the atmosphere in the school shifted. Students who had once lived in fear of him started speaking up more, sharing their thoughts and opinions freely. Teachers noticed the difference too, praising the growing sense of unity among the student body. Inspired by the positive momentum, Amara decided to take things a step further. Remembering the countless hours she'd spent training in her dad's makeshift gym, she approached the principal with an idea: a self-defense workshop for girls. The goal wasn't to teach them how to fight, she explained, but to empower them, with confidence and tools to protect themselves if needed. To her delight, the principal loved the idea and gave her full support. Flyers went up around the school advertising the workshop, and within days, dozens of girls signed up. On the first Saturday morning, Amara stood in the school gymnasium facing a group of eager participants. Nervous energy buzzed in the air as the girls stretched and warmed up, chatting excitedly about what they hoped to learn. All right, listen up, Amara called out, clapping her hands to get their attention. This isn't about learning how to beat someone up. It's about knowing how to stay safe and confident in tough situations. Trust me, sometimes just standing tall can make all the difference. For the next hour, she led the group through basic techniques: how to block a punch, how to create space if someone got too close, and how to use their voice to assert themselves. The girls practiced enthusiastically, laughing and cheering each other on as they improved. By the end of the session, many of them thanked Amara profusely, saying they felt braver already. Word of the workshop spread quickly, and soon students from neighboring schools began asking if they could attend. Amara found herself busier than ever, juggling her studies with organizing additional sessions. Yet, despite the added responsibility, she felt fulfilled in a way she never had before. Helping others discover their strength reminded her why she'd fought back against Derek in the first place. As for Derek, he continued to keep his distance, though rumors swirled that he might transfer schools altogether. Whether or not that happened, Amara knew she'd planted a seed of change, one that would hopefully grow over time. Real transformation took patience and effort, and she was willing to give both if it meant creating a safer, kinder environment for everyone. By the end of the semester, Ridgewood High felt like a different place. The cafeteria buzzed with laughter instead of tension, and friendships blossomed where fear had once reigned. Amara may not have set out to become a leader, but in standing her ground, she'd inspired others to do the same. And sometimes, that's all it takes to spark real change. The weeks rolled by, and life at Ridgewood High began to settle into a new rhythm. The cafeteria no longer buzzed with whispers about Derek's fall from grace. Instead, conversations shifted toward the upcoming school dance, midterms, and even Amara's self-defense workshops. But beneath the surface of this newfound normalcy, subtle changes continued to ripple through the student body, and within Derek himself. Derek had always prided himself on being untouchable. He strutted through the halls like he owned them, his confidence fueled by fear. Now that same hall felt like a minefield. Students who used to laugh at his jokes or follow his lead avoided him completely, their eyes darting away whenever he passed. Even his so-called friends seemed distant, whispering behind his back and snickering when they thought he couldn't hear. For someone who thrived on attention, the sudden silence was unbearable. At first, Derek tried to reclaim his old persona. He cracked jokes during class, flexed his muscles in gym, and made loud comments about random kids in the cafeteria. But none of it worked. Instead of earning laughs or nods of approval, his antics were met with awkward silence or quiet disdain. It didn't take long for him to realize that his actions carried consequences now, consequences he hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, after another failed attempt to win back his crew, Derek sat alone under the bleachers near the football field. His backpack lay forgotten beside him as he stared blankly at the grass below. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel something other than anger or arrogance. Shame. Deep down, he knew he'd brought this on himself. Every shove, every insult, every cruel joke, he'd done it all without thinking twice about how it affected others. And now those same people weren't afraid to let him know exactly how they felt. As if on cue, one of his former victims approached cautiously. It was a sophomore boy named Liam, whose lanky frame and nervous demeanor had made him an easy target for Derek's bullying. Liam hesitated for a moment, then cleared his throat. Hey. Derek looked up, startled. What do you want? He asked gruffly, though there was less bite in his tone than usual. Liam shuffled his feet nervously but held his ground. I just wanted to say, I saw what happened with you and Amara. And honestly, you kind of deserved it. Derek flinched, expecting more venom, but Liam wasn't done. Look, man, I get it. You thought acting tough would make you look cool, but all it did was make people hate you. Maybe it's time to try something different. For a moment, Derek said nothing. He stared at Liam, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to lash out, to defend himself against the truth staring him in the face. But another part, a quieter, weaker part, knew Liam was right. He nodded slowly, unable to form words. Anyway, Liam added, backing away slightly. Just think about it, okay? And with that, he turned and walked off, leaving Derek alone with his thoughts. Amara, meanwhile, found herself navigating a whole new set of challenges. While many students admired her for standing up to Derek, not everyone saw her actions as heroic. Some teachers expressed concern that her fight might inspire copycat behavior, encouraging students to solve problems with violence rather than words. Others worried that she'd become too much of a celebrity figure, overshadowing the real issues at hand. To address these concerns, Amara decided to use her platform wisely. She partnered with Mrs. Carter, the school counselor, to organize a series of anti-bullying workshops. Unlike her self-defense sessions, which focused on physical skills, these workshops emphasized communication, empathy, and conflict resolution. Together, they created activities designed to help students understand the impact of bullying, not just on the victim, but on the bully themselves. During one session, Amara shared her own story, not just the fight with Derek, but everything leading up to it. She talked about the fear she'd felt when he cornered her in the hallway, the frustration of being targeted simply because she was different, and the internal debate she'd waged before deciding to fight back. I'm not, saying violence is the answer, she told the group gathered in the auditorium. In fact, most of the time it's not. But sometimes standing your ground means showing people that you won't tolerate mistreatment. That doesn't mean throwing punches. It means finding your voice and using it. Whether it's talking to a teacher, writing a note to someone who's struggling, or stepping in when you see someone else getting bullied, every action counts. Her honesty resonated deeply with the audience. Many students nodded along, while others scribbled notes in their notebooks, clearly inspired. A few even approached her afterward to share their own experiences with bullying, thanking her for giving them the courage to speak up. But perhaps the most surprising development came during a lunch period a few days later. As Amara sat with a group of friends discussing plans for the next workshop, she noticed Derek hovering nearby. At first, she thought she was imagining things. Surely he wouldn't dare approach her after everything that had happened. But then, to her astonishment, he stepped forward and cleared his throat awkwardly. Hey, he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Can we talk? Amara exchanged glances with her friends, who shrugged in unison. She gestured for him to sit, keeping her expression neutral. Derek lowered himself onto the bench across from her, looking more uncomfortable than she'd ever seen him. What's up? She asked evenly, bracing herself for whatever came next. Derek fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, clearly struggling to find the right words. Finally, he blurted out, I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. Amara blinked, caught off guard. Of all the things she'd imagined Derek might say, this wasn't one of them. For what? She prompted, gently, wanting to hear him articulate it. For messing with you, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. For messing with everyone. I didn't realize how much it hurt until it happened to me. Amara studied him closely, searching for any sign of insincerity. All she saw was vulnerability, a stark contrast to the cocky bully she'd faced in the cafeteria. Slowly, she nodded. Apology accepted, she said simply. But words aren't enough. If you really mean it, prove it. Start treating people with respect. That's how you'll earn their trust back. Derek swallowed hard, nodding vigorously. I will. I promise. They parted ways shortly after, each carrying a renewed sense of purpose. For Derek, it marked the beginning of a long journey toward redemption. He joined the football team, channeling his aggression into something productive, and started volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring younger kids who reminded him of his former self. It wasn't easy. Old habits die hard, but with each small step he chipped away at the walls he'd built around himself. For Amara, the encounter reinforced her belief in second chances. She hadn't expected Derek to apologize, let alone change. But seeing him take responsibility for his actions gave her hope. Real change was possible, if people were willing to put in the work. By the end of the semester, Ridgewood High bore little resemblance to the tense, divided place it had been months earlier. Anti-bullying posters adorned the walls, courtesy of the student council, and discussions about kindness and inclusivity became common topics in classrooms. Teachers reported fewer incidents of harassment, and students seemed genuinely happier. Overall, Amara, for her part, remained humble despite her growing influence. She continued running her workshops, expanding them to include boys as well as girls, and collaborated with the administration to implement stricter policies against bullying. Her efforts earned her recognition as Student of the Year, though she insisted the award belonged to everyone who had contributed to making the school a better place. As graduation day approached, Amara reflected on how far she'd come since transferring to Ridgewood High. She hadn't set out to be a hero, but sometimes life hands you opportunities to make a difference, and she'd seized hers with both hands. Standing on stage to accept her diploma, she glanced across at Derek, who gave her a subtle nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and sometimes that's all that matters. Graduation day arrived with the kind of warm, golden sunlight that seemed to wrap Ridgewood High in a soft embrace. The school grounds were alive with excitement, parents snapping photos, teachers exchanging proud smiles, and students buzzing with nervous energy as they prepared to step into the next chapter of their lives. For Amara, it was a bittersweet moment. She had come so far since her first days at Ridgewood, navigating challenges she never imagined she'd face. Now, standing among her classmates in her cap and gown, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had been part of this journey. As she walked toward the stage to receive her diploma, Amara's mind drifted back to all the moments that had led her here. She thought about the quiet girl who once tried to blend into the background, hoping no one would notice her. She remembered the fear and frustration of being targeted by Derek, the bully whose presence loomed over the halls like a storm cloud. And she recalled the day she chose to stand her ground, not out of anger but out of necessity. That decision hadn't just changed her life, it had sparked a ripple effect that transformed the entire school. When Amara's name was called, the A crowd erupted into applause. Students cheered louder than usual, some even whistling and stomping their feet. It wasn't just because she was graduating. It was because she represented something bigger. To them, she was proof that courage comes in many forms. That standing up for yourself doesn't mean you have to lose your humanity, and that real strength lies not in dominance but in resilience. As she shook hands with the principal and accepted her diploma, she scanned the audience, catching glimpses of familiar faces. Her dad sat near the front row, beaming with pride, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Nearby, Liam, the boy who had confronted Derek under the bleachers, gave her a thumbs up. Even Mrs. Carter, the counselor who had guided her through tough conversations, clapped enthusiastically from her seat. But it was Derek's reaction that caught Amara off guard. Sitting a few rows behind her family, he gave her a subtle nod, his expression unreadable yet undeniably sincere. In that brief moment, Amara realized how much he had grown since their showdown in the cafeteria. He wasn't the same person anymore, and neither was she. They both carried scars from the past, but those scars told stories of lessons learned and battles fought, not just against others but within themselves. After the ceremony, students spilled onto the lawn outside the auditorium, celebrating the end of an era. Amara mingled with friends, posing for pictures and exchanging hugs. Despite the joy surrounding her, she couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia. These were the people who had shaped her high school experience, the ones who had laughed with her, challenged her, and supported her when she needed it most. Saying goodbye wouldn't be easy. "Hey, Amara!" a voice called out, breaking her train of thought. Turning around, she saw Derek approaching cautiously, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his graduation gown. He looked nervous, unsure whether she'd welcome him or turn him away. "What's up?" she asked, keeping her tone light. Derek hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I just wanted to say thanks," he said finally, his voice steady, despite the weight of his words. "You didn't have to talk to me after everything that happened, but you did, and it made me realize I could do better." Amara smiled faintly, touched by his honesty. "You're the one who did the hard work," she replied. "I just gave you a push, the rest was all you." Derek nodded, looking down at his shoes. "Yeah, well, I still owe you, so thanks for everything." With that, he extended his hand. Amara hesitated briefly before shaking it, feeling a strange mix of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and maybe even a hint of friendship. Whatever lay ahead for Derek, she knew he was on the right path. Sometimes redemption starts with a single step. Later that evening, Amara found herself sitting alone on the swings at the park near her house. The sky had turned shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the playground. She swung gently, letting the cool breeze wash over her as she reflected on what the future might hold. Her dad joined her shortly afterward, settling onto the swing beside hers. "How are you feeling, kiddo?" he asked, his voice warm and comforting. Amara shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I don't know. Happy, I guess. Sad, too. It's weird, saying goodbye to everything we've known." Her dad chuckled, softly. "Change is always hard, but it's also exciting. You've got a whole world waiting for you out there." "I hope I'm ready for it," she admitted, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "You are," her dad said firmly. "Look at everything you've already done. You stood up to a bully, inspired your peers, and helped make this school a better place. If that's not proof you can handle whatever comes next, I don't know what is." Amara glanced at him, gratitude swelling in her chest. "Thanks, Dad. For everything. I wouldn't have gotten through this without you." Her dad reached over and squeezed her hand. "That's what parents are for. Now go out there and show the world what you're made of." In the weeks that followed, Amara began preparing for college, packing boxes and organizing her belongings. Each item she packed carried memories of her time at Ridgewood High, the books she'd read during lonely lunches, the notebooks filled with notes from late-night study sessions, and the medals she'd earned at local boxing tournaments. Though she was excited for the future, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness knowing she'd never walk those halls again. Still, she reminded herself that endings were also beginnings. The skills she'd learned, the friendships she'd forged, and the lessons she'd absorbed would stay with her forever. She had proven to herself that she was capable of more than she ever imagined, that she could rise above adversity and inspire others to do the same. On her final visit to Ridgewood High before leaving for college, Amara stopped by the gymnasium, where she'd held her self-defense workshops. The space was empty now, its polished floors reflecting the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. She ran her fingers along the edge of the bleachers, remembering the laughter and determination Of the girls who had trained there, their faces flashed in her mind. Young, hopeful, and brimming with potential. "I'll miss this place," she murmured to herself, her voice echoing softly in the vast room. As she turned to leave, she spotted a folded piece of paper tucked under one of the seats. Curious, she picked it up and unfolded it. Written in bold letters was a message. "Thank you for showing us our strength. We'll carry it with us wherever we go." Tears welled up in Amara's eyes as she clutched the note to her chest. It was a reminder that her impact extended far beyond her own story. She had planted seeds of confidence and courage in others, and those seeds would continue to grow long after she was gone. Walking out of the gymnasium for the last time, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. Life wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But she had faced her fears, embraced her strengths, and used them to lift others up. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Life rarely was. But she was ready. Armed with resilience, compassion, and an unshakable belief in herself, Amara stepped forward, eager to see where the journey would take her. Whatever challenges awaited, she knew she'd face them head-on, just as she always had. After all, storms may rage, but they also clear the way for brighter skies.